bit about them. In areas like milk, there has been real industry interest in starting a road mapping process of understanding what can be done, where the opportunities are to reduce what a very complex impact across the whole life cycle.
Thank you. I think one of the things that we're hearing is that maybe the tools are out there to understand how we measure carbon in the supply chain. And there's some very good examples and practical examples that have been done to collect that data. One of the things I'm also hearing is it's about sort of setting standards and getting people to sort of require their suppliers to do certain things. When we work with a lot of our businesses, we also sort of get the pushback on the supplier end, and particularly some of the SMEs in the supply chain that sort of say, well, that's all great for you, Tesco's, or you, Marks and Spencer's, developing these requirements from us as suppliers. But the reality for us is that the resource requirements for us to find this data is actually quite it's a big task, and it's sort of something that are not necessarily set up to do or have the experience to do. So in terms of thinking about sort of, and there are many organisations, and probably both of those examples I've just given, where it's about building capacity in the supply chain and actually working with suppliers on gathering data, not just sort of saying, right, we want this from you now, kind of go off and get it. So in terms of your various experiences in that, in terms of actually reaching out into the supply chain to get that engagement process going, and others maybe some examples you can share on that, and maybe Terence, I don't know if you have some experience with that.
Well, I suppose thinking about this is a pretty early stage. I mean, this discussion about methodology and what evidence people have got. I mean, as you may know, we are working with Euan and the Carbon Trust on methodologies for understanding carbon footprints, embedded greenhouse gas emissions. And I think one of the questions in taking that work forward will be how do you make it useful for smaller businesses. Now maybe there are some models which are helpful in thinking about some of the things, some of the positive and negative lessons from environmental management systems where there have been sort of simpler tools developed alongside more complex management systems, and we're going to have together to think about how you can use that. I think the other thing is just to sort of pick up on Andrew's point, this idea of shared evidence which people can use easily. It's hardly starting really, but I think government and organisations like the Trust alike have quite a strong role there.
I think there are two elements to that. The first is around standardisation, and the second is around data, as Terence has just said. We recognise that to have Tesco's going back through the supply chain and asking for information in one form, Marks and Spencer going off and asking for similar information but in a different form, and then all the other retailers doing different things, will create a huge amount of confusion, first of all, and second of all, an enormous administrative overhead for everyone else back up that chain. So that standardisation process is absolutely critical, and we recognise that. To that end, we have written up and published the methodology that we've used to do our carbon footprinting and supply chain analysis work, and that's available on our website. You can go and download that, read that. I can't claim it's the most inspiring, interesting document in the world, but it goes into the technical complexity you need to understand what to go and measure. And actually creating that standardisation is really important. We plan to run a consultation over the next 12 months to develop that methodology so that we get real feedback from everyone out there who might want to use it, be that companies and trade associations, academics, NGOs, and consultants, any other interest group. We're keen to hear from you all on what we've done and how we can make it better, more appropriate for that end use. And then the second area, as I said, is data. And I guess I've got a litmus test I always try and use when we're talking about data. We mentioned SMEs already. We've thought in the food chain in particular about the smallholder farmer and can he feed into this process. I grew up on a farm in the south of Scotland. My dad still farms beef and lamb. And so whenever we go out and talk to suppliers, I always try and put it in those terms. If I was to go and ask my old man this question, would he hit me around the ear or would he be able to tell me the answer? And when you go out and ask people what the carbon footprint of their business is or what the carbon footprint of their process is, they typically glaze over very, very quickly. But there are some pretty simple things that you can ask them that get you to the carbon footprint. And so in the case of the farm, it's simple stuff like how much diesel did you buy to run in your tractor last year? How much fertilizer did you buy and put on a particular field for a particular crop? And that's information that most people know, most people are able to give you. And then you're able to go and use some secondary data to turn that into the carbon footprint figure that we're looking for. So the real learning there is breaking it down into bite-sized chunks and asking the right questions of the right people at the right time. And that I found to be much more practical than going in all guns blazing, expecting everybody to know the answer already.
Yeah, coming back to my comment about needing a network of champions, you really have to have one person that you send your emails or your phone up in the organisation, and you know that they're keen, and you have to support that person. They're not likely to have all the skills that they need from the start to provide you with the information that you need. I think in every footprint that I've done, probably up to 50% of the data that's come in the first time has been rubbish. And there's a lot of there's a lot of different reasons for that. Could be anything from adding in an extra zero or dropping one, from just transposing from a bill to whatever form they're using to come back to you, or fundamental misconceptions about units or different things like that. So you definitely can't just push the responsibility up the supply chain and say, you give me this, because you really need to be, there needs to be some lead actor in the process that interacts with all the other players and provides them with some support.
Thank you very much. One of the things that is going on in this whole debate is this issue that this is early days, we don't have all the reference data, we're developing methodologies, there isn't any sort of standard or piece of legislation that we can currently point to and say this is the way that we need to do it. But at the same time, when you do hear so many studies and surveys talking about the consumer wanting action and wanting to be able to take action, there's this sort of parallel process of making sure that the information you want to maybe put in the product is accurate, but at the same time, so that the consumer can make a choice, but at the same time not having that information, so that there's a push and a pull going on in this whole world of communicating on carbon embedded or embodied in a product or sort of across the whole value chain. So maybe it would be interesting to get your thoughts on sort of where this is going, what the next steps that we should be taken, and sort of what consideration do we need in terms of who's out there developing these standards, what's the credibility of product claims, and how can the consumer play a role that doesn't necessarily, if we have to wait a little while for a universal carbon or climate label. I don't know, Terence, if you want to maybe start.
Well, in terms of standards, I think we do need to try and to force the pace of a process to get credible methodologies which are accepted in the proper British standards type format, and we're certainly doing work with trust on that. You might want to say it more in a moment. I think one of the questions about all these standards is how much is precision and how much consumer information is going to be is going to be critical, because we saw